You're tuned to jingle-free BBC Radio 4, so don't touch that dial. There are 30 minutes coming up of how the UK and the BBC learned to love that small and to many very beautiful sound of the radio jingle.
It's a merry-go-round of musical fun. Radio 1, thunderful BBC.
My name's David Hemsley. I've been collecting jingles. I'm a jingle enthusiast and have been doing that for almost 30 years now, and I have about 50,000 separate jingles.
It's National Radio 1 for Gambaccini.
I had my first jingle at my college radio station, which was WDCR. My first reaction was they pronounced it right, because with a name like Gambaccini, you always face the possibility of exotic variations. I mean, I get exotic variations in post. I've had Mr. Lamborghini or Mr. Gambaccini. And so to hear them sing your name pronounced correctly, well, it was more of a relief than a, gee, I've arrived.
For Gambaccini.
One of my great heroes, I know Paul Gambaccini liked him very much as well. In New York, Dan Ingram, I went over to America and studied the radio over there. I sat in a hotel room and studied the American way of broadcasting. And I went to see Dan Ingram and I watched him in the studio. He wasn't really involved with the music at all. He was sitting there and while the records were going on, reading the paper.
77 WABC.
Hi, Kemosabe. Big Dan Ingram here, starting it off with Tommy Rowan, the number 9 song this week. Sheila, let's go.
Sweet little Sheila, you'll know her if you see her.
After having had 2 years on Radio Caroline, I remember broadcasting in the morning on Caroline, and this massive, great American minesweeper came up out of the blue, and the biggest aerial mast I think I've ever seen in my life. And it started doing test transmissions with the very first high-powered American jingles, wonderful Radio London.
The London Sound.
I fell in love with the jingles and the American approach of radio. And I suppose the difference between Radio Caroline and Radio London, the pirate ship Radio London, was that one was professional, an American high-powered top 40 station, and the other one was, to me, a load of college students all of a sudden playing around with it. And I had to go to Radio London. And it was my biggest ambition. It became an obsession with me because I listened into Radio London, I fell in love with it.
Wonderful music means B-I-G-L. Wonderful Radio London. Big L.
Well, my name is Steve England, and I run a company called S2 Blue, together with Simon Prentice. I've actually been doing it for about 25 years now, producing and recording jingles.
Steve England.
Quite often people think jingles are very disposable, rubbish music, that kind of thing. But all of these musicians who were writing and playing these things, they were big band people. They were people who really understood the music. They could read and write music. A lot of it was very jazz-based. A lot of it was very big band-based. So musically, the birth of the jingle comes from a very sophisticated musical background. I just knew these things sounded great when I heard them on air, and couldn't wait to get into the industry.
It's too much. Radio 1 is wonderful.
I'm Johnny Beerling, and I was one of the original producers with Radio 1. In fact, I produced The Breakfast Show with Tony Blackburn, which was the first programme ever broadcast there. That was back in 1967. And in 1985, I actually became controller of the network and continued with that job until 1993.
Johnny Beerling.
In the days of the Light programme prior to 1967, we didn't have generic radio. There was the Home, the Light and the Third. And even on the Light programme, it was not unheard for each announcer to introduce a programme and have a breath pause before the programme started. And similarly, when a programme ended, the continuity announcer would make a closing announcement, have a religious breath pause before he started the next one. Now, the new style of radio, Radio 1 and Radio 2 in particular, was modelled on what had been heard on the pirate stations and needed a much slicker presentation. This, of course, was a big shock to the listeners because instead of having an announcer say, "You are listening to BBC Radio 1," you had a sung jingle, and the impact of this was absolutely enormous. Suddenly there was staid old auntie suddenly coming out singing identifications.
1967.
Now, with the clock ticking slowly up to 7 a.m., it's going to be time to welcome Radio 1's first early show on 247 meters medium wave, whilst Breakfast Special continues on Radio 2. 10 seconds to go before Radio 1, Tony Blackburn, and Radio 2, Paul Hollingdale. Stand by for switching. Get tuned to Radio 1 or 2. 5, 4, 3. Radio 2, Radio 1, go.
The voice of Radio 1. Just for fun. Music too much.
And good morning, everyone. Welcome to the exciting new sound of Radio 1.
I suppose my recollections of the show was, first of all, the enormous power it had. I mean, when I went out on the streets, I used to use the dog Arnold, the old woof woof. When I walked along the street, people used to wind the windows down and say, hello, Tony, woof woof.
The original company that did the jingles for Radio London and then for Radio 1 was called PAMS, short for Promotions and Merchandisers. And they had been very, very good in doing jingles for the major top 40 stations in America and for the pirate station Radio London. And they did the original package for Radio 1. What we did for that was take the theme of London Bridges Falling Down, and that was played on the bass, so it went dum 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 dum.
Radio 1 is wonderful. It's too much.
In the early days of Radio 1, there were two warring schools of thought, which were referred to by the floor of the building they were located on.
The Gambaccini.
The fourth floor was the daily DJs, who played pop hits from the chart and the agreed playlist. And then there was a third floor, which was the weeknights and weekend people. Well, the third floor people wouldn't go near a jingle if they could avoid it. But the fourth floor people, led by the incredibly popular Tony Blackburn, loved the idea of having an American-type top 40 station. So there was this war on for the soul of Radio 1, and inevitably sound won out.
Music hour by hour.
Too much on your tower. It's great.
Of power.
Music hour by hour. Up to date on your tower. Wonderful BBC.
Selling. It's sell, sell, sell the whole time. It's selling the station, it's selling the music, it's selling my name. Very important to identify yourself the whole time. Give your station an image as well. With a radio station, you're only selling a brand name. You're telling people you're wonderful. If you don't tell people you're wonderful, what do they think you are? You know, there might be somebody out there that thinks you're awful.
Wonderful.
Too much.
Radio 1.
It's great.
The greatest.
I had a sort of sharp-edged pop programme on Saturday afternoons called Where It's At.
Johnny Beerling.
Kenny Everett was doing a bit of work on it, and we had homemade jingles, as they were, for that particular programme.
While sitting at my piano one day, a magical thought came my way to write a number for the BBC.
Kenny Everett and Chris Denning, the presenters, were actually very, very friendly with John Lennon and Paul McCartney. And Kenny in particular persuaded John Lennon to make an identification jingle for that programme.
Kenny Everett, Chris Denning, together on the wireless machine. Kenny Everett, Chris Denning, all together on the wireless machine. Oh, Kenny Everett, Chris Denning, all together on the wireless machine. Chris Everett, Chris Denning, Chris
We had the stereogram, so we taped off the radio there. So up to the mid-70s until the late 1980s, I think I was able to fill about 12 banana boxes with various tapes.
David Hemsley Collector.
And of course radio jingles came from everywhere, and as well as all the good ones that they're about, there was ones like this. It went, I'm for me at Radio Scotland calling you, fun for you at Radio Scotland 212, or something like that.
Don't you miss your favorite program, doesn't matter where you are, in the home or in the factory, Radio Scotland's never far. Fun for you at Radio Scotland calling you. Turn it out to Radio Scotland, stay tuned in on 242.
Pam's had been very, very good in doing jingles for Radio 1, but after several years they went out of business, and then in 1975 John Wolfert was introduced to me, and he had started his own company. He had actually worked as an apprentice for Pam's, and he started his own company, Jam, short for John and Mary Lynn, his wife, and I was immediately impressed with what they did.
Hello, Mr. Beerling. This is John Wolfert at Jam Creative Productions in Dallas.
John was quite shrewd. He made a demonstration tape in which he demonstrated the type of product that he would make for Radio 1.
Our goal is to demonstrate the quality of our product and the versatility of our sound, and we've prepared several Radio 1 and 2 jingles especially for this tape. Now, naturally, there's no charge or obligation involved. We just wanted you to get an idea of what Jam can do for you. Let's start with Radio 1. Radio 1's jingles should be strong, bright, and functional.
The station of the nation, Radio 1.
An exciting sound.
247, Radio 1.
As you indicated, Radio 1 has many features requiring unique intro jingles.
247, weather check.
I'm Jonathan Wolfert, president of Jam Creative Productions in Dallas, Texas.
Jonathan Wolfert.
When I got there and played him the tape, he got very interested because he liked what he heard there. And in fact, he became so enthusiastic that he set up an appointment for me to go see Radio 2. So in early '76 began a very long and fun association.
Music radio for the 90s. Radio 1 FM.
There is an art to writing these jingles so that they will work well between songs or leading into songs. I mean, the way they end has to be very clean and precise so that a DJ knows when to bring in the next song and not have it overlap and sound horrible for a few seconds and all that. So there's technical parameters in there too. But the main feeling was just, you know, this is fun, this is musical, this is young, especially Radio 1 was appealing to a younger audience, and we just try to keep that spirit.
Rock in the UK. Radio 1. FM stereo. Radio 1. The UK's favorite.
It wasn't until around about 1976 when I heard one particular jingle that was played to speak over the traffic report on BBC Radio 2.
This is Radio 2 with your traffic news.
It was Terry Wogan's show. It was pretty horrendous winter of that year, I can remember. And the actual tune to it actually absolutely blew me away, and I thought, wow, what is this?
When you're producing a song, you may have 3 or 4 or 5 minutes or more to develop a musical idea and get to, quote-unquote, the good part, or the hook, as it's called. Whereas in a jingle that only runs a few seconds, you have to get to the good part immediately, which is kind of the fun challenge. You have 10 seconds, maybe 20, maybe 3. There's an old jingle that we did for WABC that they used in 1977, I think, is when they started it. And it's only 2.5 seconds long. And there's so much stuff going on in this 2.5 seconds. It's got an interesting little electronic effect, and then there's a device called a Sonovox, which is a way of making musical instruments appear to be speaking or singing, that does the W. And then the singers come in with the ABC, and in 2.5 seconds, it gets your attention, it tells you who they are, and it gets out of the way. That jingle actually won a Clio Award, which is an award that's given for advertising in different categories. And it just is hilarious to me that something 2.5 seconds long can win an award. It's a really good 2.5 seconds.
WABC.
I set up with my partner of that time a jingle company really to try and do them along the same lines as they did them in America.
Steve England.
We were starting from scratch, and a lot of our early work sounds very crude nowadays. But, you know, over the years you learn and you find the singers and you find the people who can do it correctly, you find the best ways of working and so on, and you gradually build the thing up and get yourself a particular sound. I remember us doing a package for a station called Devon Air, and they wanted something that was very memorable, logo, a very open air country sort of sound. We produced a jingle package for Devon Air, which I remember as being particularly successful. I'm really a radio production guy. That's what I consider myself to be. I'm not a musician. I don't write music. I kind of, instinctively know when something is right or wrong. And I'm very lucky in the time that I've been working in the industry to have pulled some very clever and very smart musicians and composers around me to work with them, because I knew what it needed to sound like.
Roberts, Kev. How do you think? The triplet or the bada? Kev Roberts, Kev Roberts. Okay, you got it. Kev Roberts, Kev Roberts. Mm-hmm. Kev Roberts. Just wants to brighten it.
Yeah, sorry.
No. Okay. Kev Roberts.
Making a backing track now is not like having a huge orchestra in the room and you rehearse them and they get it wrong and all that kind of that used to happen back in the 50s and 60s. Nowadays it's just somebody sitting at a keyboard programming things in, playing it back, listening to it. So it's like listening to paint dry, and it takes ages. But the vocals are always the most interesting thing. I tend to take all the vocal sessions, hearing people get them right and get them wrong, and then try another harmony and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Kev Roberts. Just need to get our TS together, don't we? Roberts. Kev Roberts. Still could brighten a bit, isn't it? Kev Roberts. Let's lean on that, hey?
As time goes on, you always get a new generation come in, and they always want to have a revolution of some sort. And I guess probably sort of towards the end of the 90s, we had a complete revolution in what was required. Everybody felt then that they had a lot of the multi-harmony jingles. It was associated with the 80s and 90s, and they wanted more jingles that sort of were based on solos and were more like the music that the radio stations were playing. I suppose it's a reflection of the way that the youth culture has developed from the turn of the century, and that is that they needed more attitude. They wanted to basically not sound enthusiastic. Everybody's got to have attitude now, and so a lot of the things that we were doing, where we were singing jingles that would go, Radio Hallam, and it would be, hey, hi, we're here. The word cheesy was starting to be used about lots of things where anybody showed any enthusiasm. So as a result of that, the kind of jingles that were then sort of required, instead of going up with the logo going up, the tune going up, they would ask for the tune to go down. So you get, da-da-da-FM. And so we have to find a path in there now to give jingles a bit more attitude and a bit more street cred.
Well, jingles aren't as happy clappy as they used to be. They've changed with the time, they've changed with songs. I mean, we're talking about jingles from the early 70s. We're talking about sticking them between ABBA records or Gilbert O'Sullivan or Pussycat. These days, they really do have to match the music more, and they're not so much jingles anymore, they're more stabs.
BBC 6 Music. Liz Kershaw.
They're much more aggressive, and the much more like punctuation. Yes, the branding. I mean, we've a rule now at 6 Music, you can't segue 2 records, that old word. You can't segue 2 records without putting branding in between. And some of them are as short as 2 or 3 seconds. They just go in there, say what station it is, maybe say who the presenter is, and they're out of there. They're not singing the praises of the station or the presenter like they used to. And I think that's good for the present day. I would never have missed them for the world in the early 70s and through the late 80s, but I think the ones we've got now are much more modest.
The 6 Music Chart with Chris Horton's BBC 6 Music.
My name's Chris Reay, and my job is to look after the on-air promotions and the jingles on 6 Music.
Chris Reay.
BBC 6 Music started back in March 2002, and being a digital radio station, one of the most important things was for us to get the radio station's name across, and of course jingles really help us do that. We first of all decided on the kind of music that the radio station was playing, and then the jingles have to obviously reflect that. And we wanted to have a range of different styles because we play quite a broad range of music, therefore the jingles also had to reflect that musically, but also the jingles had to have a very strong logo from the radio station. So we discussed with Weisbutter, the company that makes our jingles, how the station's name would come across in the logo that would actually sing out BBC 6 Music. The actual jingle goes, so it'll have a bit of, a bar of music, and then it'll go da 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 da. So it's BBC 6 Music.
My name's Paul Plant, and I'm the General Manager of Weisbutter in London. We came up with a 6-note logo, which was basically the theme that ran through all the cuts. We were briefed incredibly well by the team there. Rick Blackson, Chris Reay were very precise in what they wanted. And so they would say to us, we want a cut that sounds like Deep Purple. So the writers, Bill Padley and Jeremy Godfrey, would write a cut that sounded like Deep Purple, wasn't exactly copying them, but would end with this 6-note logo, and it worked very well. But they used the voice to then brand the station as well.
BBC 6 Music. Closer to the music that matters.
Our approach latterly, I would say particularly in the last year, has been to produce jingles that sound like the kind of songs that radio are playing. So our approach most of the time is to try and condense a pop song or an R&B track into 10 and 15 seconds. So it really does depend on the brief, and every brief is different. We're in one of our studios here in central London, just around the corner from BBC, where we're putting the final touches on a package for a station in East Anglia called Vibe FM 105, 108. There's 10 cuts in the package. They've been basically given us a different music genre to do a cut or a jingle in that vein. So there's a smooth R&B, and there's a hip hop cut, and there's a Euro cut. So our guys are just putting the final touches on those.
Make sure he's singing in tune.
105 to 108 Vibe FM.
That's a work in progress thing, not totally finished, but we've got the instrumentation at the top. This gives us the backing track. And then we've got 6 tracks of vocals doing leads and harmony. So you got the lead
105, 200
with the harmony in,
FM.
and a second lead line and second harmony.
Love 5.
So if you put it all together, it roughly sound like this.
105, 205 FM. Love.
When it's mixed, it will sound great.
I'm Kevin Marsh, editor of Today.
Kevin Marsh.
Radio 4 is one network that clings on to a very few signature tunes, but it has no jingles. Now, in the unlikely event that that's reversed by the new controller, then here on Today, we'd be in the market to catch the early listeners. So here's my challenge to S2 Blue, to come up with a jingle that catches the attention of very busy people who are interested in the news. We want a soothing but a spiky mood. We've got a traditional audience. The program has traditional qualities, and although it's a news program, it's still an easy way into the day and the day's news. The message should be what the program offers, the talking points of the day with the leaders in their field, presented with humour and a bit of bite. And if you want a slogan, the top stories with the top people, today on BBC Radio 4.
This is Steve England. It's an awfully difficult brief to produce a musical ident for the Today programme. They did actually introduce musical idents on Radio 4 some decades ago, but I remember they were universally hated by the listeners. So anyway, we've had a shot. We've tried to make it proud and serious without over-egging it. To sing anything we thought would be sort of inappropriate, really, so what we did was put a voiceover on it. If they ever did use that dreaded word jingles on the Today programme, we thought they would need to be practical signposts, identifying quickly and getting out quickly. And here it is.
The top stories with the top people. Today on BBC Radio 4.
My verdict? It just might catch on.
The top stories with the top people. Today on BBC Radio 4.
I think the perfect jingle for me has to be short, colourful. It has to sell specific slots on radio, and the harmonies and the voices, all the vocal talent, it all has to sound absolutely top.
Turn the lights down low.
Certainly in the early days they were better than the songs that were being played.
Then tune to Radio 1. Good life.
That was Don't Touch That Dial, the story of the radio jingle from WABC in New York to the Today programme on BBC Radio 4. Sung name checks were composed and performed by S2 Blue. The producer was Richard Bannerman.